Hello and welcome to this Ariana Resources XRF training video. The purpose of this video is to train the team in the field using the portable XRF live in the field for soil sampling. So I'm going to go through a few procedures, a few routine checks that we need to do in order to use the XRF in the field. So the first of these will be pre-field preparation. Pre-field preparation. It is very important to make some preparations before you head out into the field, mainly to assess your survey grid via Google Earth or expert GPS and understand where your access points are. You want to be able to collect your data in the most efficient manner possible. You do not want to be walking miles and miles to get to your first location and then have to walk back to the car that same way. So it's all about knowing where the closest road is to your survey point and getting onto the grid as quickly as possible and getting back to the car as efficiently as possible. Sample numbers, so you need to think about how many samples you're collecting each day, 150, 150. Depending on your sample numbers, you want to plan how you're going to move across the grid through various locations. I have talked about this again in the Expert GPS tutorial. So if you haven't watched that, make sure you watch that as well before you head out into the field. Resetting your GPS every day is a very important point. So what you do not want to do is head into the field and find that your numbering of your waypoints on your GPS are out of sync with the XRF. So every day the XRF will start with reading 1 being a calibration test and reading 2 your first waypoint. So what you don't want to happen is having your GPS in the field starting on waypoint 55. So it's very important to reset your GPS. And again, I've got a separate tutorial on how to do this with your GPS. So if you haven't already seen that, please watch that video too. And finally, for field preparations, make sure the XRF batteries are charged and that you have all the equipment with you, the polythene windows, the Phillips screwdriver and the titanium disc. Those are all very important accessories that you need to carry with you in the field. Also, make sure that you have the XRF holster so that you can keep the XRF safely guarded next to you when you're walking between points, or alternatively, wear it in your hand with the safety wrist strap on. Arriving on site. When you arrive on site, the first thing you should do is switch on your GPS and put that to one side so that the GPS can start calculating satellites and start getting itself ready for the work that's going to come ahead. Try and park within the survey grid, get as close as you can. So again, going back to the pre-prep work you've done, you should know which access routes there are to the survey grid. Get into the grid as far as you can and survey perhaps from the inside out accordingly. Make sure you pack your pack properly, have all your field equipment with you. In the presentation that I presented to you guys earlier, there is a very clear outline of some of the key equipment that you need to be carrying with you. But specifically for the XRF, you need the titanium calibration disc, the polythene windows, and the Phillips screwdriver. Those are all very important items to carry with you in the field. Ideally, when you are in the field, keep your GPS on all the time. Do not feel that you need to switch it on and off between locations. You're just going to be wasting time waiting for the GPS to pick up satellites. So just keep it on for all the time, duration of the day. Normally with Duracell batteries, the GPS should be able to stay on, should have a life of about 3-4 days in the field, depending on how much time you're spending in the field. Likewise with the XRF, keep the XRF on all the time. Don't switch it off between points. The only time you should switch the XRF off is if you're stopping for lunch, or if you're switching the batteries potentially, or if you're carrying out some in-field maintenance, which we'll talk about later. Setting off. Before you set off into the field, one of the very first things you need to do when carrying the XRF, this is just a cardboard cutout that I've mocked up for this training demonstration. So the first thing you need to do is put the safety strap on around your wrist to make sure that the XRF is secure at all times in case you accidentally let go. So that's the first thing you need to do in the field. The other thing you need to do before you head off into the field is to make sure the XRF is calibrated properly. So in your pack you should have the titanium calibration disc, and basically you just need to put that on a nice flat surface and scan the XRF for the full length of the analytical survey, which is about 90 seconds, and that should calibrate the disc. So just check the screen on the back to see if the calibration check has passed. And once that's passed, just look on the top left of the screen and it should say reading 1. So your very first reading of the day is your calibration check via the titanium disc, either the portable titanium disc or the titanium disc which is housed within the docking station of the XRF. So either way you can calibrate the XRF via this route. So again, in the data that I've sent you guys, there is a full walkthrough of all the procedures that I'm talking about here, I'm briefly mentioning. So how to calibrate the disc, how to change the polythene windows, how to edit data on your GPS, and obviously how to upload and download data. So make sure you're fully familiarized with all the protocols before you start collecting data effectively. So after you've calibrated your XRF at the location where you've parked your vehicle, so this will be your first point, so before you leave your car, calibrate your disc, take your first waypoint. So waypoint 1 on your GPS should correspond to your calibration, which is also conveniently the location where you parked your car. So if you ventured off for a few kilometers and you end up a little bit lost, you always know that XRF waypoint 1 is where your car is parked. So you can do a simple go-to to get back to the car. So after you've taken your first reading and calibrated the XRF, head off to your first waypoint. When you get there, basically just have a quick look around and assess where you can quickly take a reading. So the simplest way is to just use your shoe, scuff the dirt a little bit, and make a nice clearing. So remove any organic material away from where you want to do your reading, and make sure that you're just seeing some nice soil or loose unconsolidated material. So obviously there are times where this becomes difficult, particularly when you're working on outcrop surfaces or when you're working on scree slopes. So again, in the documentation I've sent you, there are a couple of troubleshooting methods to get around these issues. So for example, with outcrops, what you want to do is try and find little pockets of loose material that have collected and analyze those specifically. Or with scree slopes, if you can't dig below the scree to get to some fresh loose unconsolidated material, some soil, then simply just move away from that survey point until you can find a location where to take an appropriate reading. Ideally, you want to keep moving along the line. So instead of heading off to the east or the west, if your lines are north-south, keep moving north and find a location where you can take an alternative reading. Likewise, when you get to a location, don't spend a lot of time trying to get the GPS accuracy to be as best as it can be. 1 meter accuracy is great, but if you find that you're walking around in circles to try and get 1 meter accuracy, then you're wasting a lot of time. So simply get to a location within about 5, maximum 10 meters of accuracy, and just take your waypoint there. So particularly when you're in forested area like I'm in now, your GPS accuracy will decrease. So for those reasons, you may be 10, sometimes even 15 meters out, depending on the type of slope you're on as well. So I suppose the advice there is just to not waste time, get to a location, try and get within a reasonable amount of accuracy, take your point and move on to the next location. So ideally you'll be working in teams of 2. And the very important aspect of working in teams of two is that there'll be a GPS person and an XRF person. So person with GPS will be moving on to the location, and once he's there, XRF person will start to analyze that location. While the person with the XRF is making the analysis, person with the GPS should already be moving on to the next point. And then the idea is that the guy with the XRF can then just follow him straight on, and you guys are leapfrogging from point to point to point. And really it sort of makes everything a bit more streamlined for collecting the samples as quickly as possible. The key thing there is communication. So person with GPS should be saying the waypoint. Person with XRF should be checking their screen after each reading to make sure that the GPS and the XRF are talking to each other, in the sense that they're both on the same waypoint. So reading 5 on my XRF should correspond to GPS point 5. One of the most important things about the XRF in the field is to constantly watch the polythene window on the front of the XRF. So as you're doing your analysis after each reading, check the polythene window and make sure there's no damage to it. Make sure that there's no sediment buildup or contamination on the lens that can ultimately affect the readings of your next location. So what I normally do is after each reading, I just check the lens, I just wipe off any dust, give it a little blow, and make sure that the window isn't broken or compromised in any way, and then off to the next location. If the window is broken, then you simply need to replace the polythene window by undoing the top 2 screws on the XRF, opening the flap door and putting in a new window. Simply do up the 2 screws, being careful obviously not to lose them, and then you're ready to go again. Obviously the XRF needs to be off when you change the windows, and when you turn it back on again, you may need to do a cal check after. There are several very important troubleshooting issues that you would need to know before you take the XRF into the field. Again, I've listed most of these, and particularly the most important ones, within the documentation that I've sent you guys, so make sure you have a look at those. So often when you're in the field, you have the tendency to want to use the trigger to activate the device. Now, the Ariana Delta that you guys are currently using, the trigger is sometimes it gets stuck, or sometimes it doesn't fire it properly, and you may end up with a failed reading. So alternatively, instead of using the trigger, I would use the back of the screen. There's a simple play button or record button. I would use that analysis button to activate the XRF at each reading location. It's very important to always keep the XRF flat against the surface that you're analyzing. The XRF has a built-in safety feature that if the XRF moves away from the analytical surface, it'll automatically switch off and create a failed reading. So keep that surface nice and flat, and for the duration of your analysis, so all the time the lights on the back of the XRF are flashing, the XRF needs to be flush against the surface that you're analyzing. So keep it nice and steady. If you do happen to get failed readings in the field, it's very important to note that either with the GPS or the XRF, you cannot delete data and should not delete data off either one. So if your GPS or your XRF are not in sync with each other, whether it's a waypoint or a reading that's failed, you either need to take an additional reading with the XRF or an additional reading with the GPS. So again, I've outlined full details on how to get both back into sync in the documentation sent to you. So just make sure that you stay on top of keeping the numbers of the XRF with the GPS. At the end of the day, when we download all the data from both devices, you are then able to synchronize across the successful readings and the failed readings, and then ultimately we can then delete the failed readings, providing that we can correspond and connect the XRF and the GPS data. So have a good read through all the correspondence that I've sent, and I'm sure you guys will find some other errors that happen in the field. Let me know if you have any issues. One other note is that the XRF's worst enemy is water in the form of either rain or moisture in the soil. So never take an XRF reading on the bank of a stream close to where the soil is saturated with water, or if particularly after it's just rain, don't take the XRF out into the field. Instead, you might have to wait a day or two for the soil to dry out. If the soil is slightly damp, just a little bit of dampness, that's okay. So often when you're in a woodland area like I'm in now, you can find that the soil will be slightly damp. That should be okay. What is not acceptable is if you can clump the soil together almost like a mud. Then that's too much moisture, and that will affect your analysis quite significantly. So try and keep the soil as dry as possible. Try and keep the XRF as dry as possible as well. Thank you for watching this video. If you guys have any questions, obviously get in touch and we can discuss some more of the issues. Thank you.